And so the point is, if I'm president, Betsy DeVos's whole notion from charter schools to this are gone.
And then what do I want to do with that money? I want to invest it in the education and the future of every one of our children. It's about early childhood education. It's about post-high school education. But I want to make a quick pitch about it's also about an historic investment in K-12 in America.
Should the government subsidize lunch in public school for all children, regardless of their income?
And you know what? And breakfast and dinner as well.
As you can see, over the weekend, 7 of the Democratic 2020 contenders participated in the first ever nationally televised presidential candidate forum on public education. That forum was sponsored by 11 different education groups.
So each of the candidates vowed to increase federal spending in schools and promised to support teachers, students, and parents. So joining us for the thoughts on their proposals is Lily Eskelsen García. She's president of the National Education Association. Lily, it's great to see you.
Great to have you.
And a 6th grade teacher who's had 39 kids in the classroom, so I think that qualifies.
You know what you're talking about.
That qualifies you more than being the president.
Yes.
So, yes. Lily, tell us about what you saw up on the stage, what distinguishes some of these different candidates' proposals, and some broader trends that you're seeing in the education movement.
So I cannot say this strongly enough. What you just said, historic, first time ever, and that we've had a dedicated forum to public education. And a whole lot of folks, when you ask them, what you think the president does or should do on public education, they go, oh, the president has something with public education. It never occurs to them. And we have really one person to thank for lifting that up, that the president is really important in this. So I want to give a shout out to Betsy DeVos for showing us the cautionary tale of what happens when you get a president who puts someone as the Secretary of Education. She's never stepped inside a public school before she was sworn in. So people are paying attention. They're paying attention because of the Red for Ed wave of teachers and support staff wearing red T-shirts, camping out at their state capitals, saying to their governors and their state legislatures, we're tired of you underfunding our schools, expecting us to fill in the gap.
Yeah.
I paid for a lot of field trips, a lot of art projects, a lot of science experiments for my kids out of my own pocket. And so do educators all across the country do that.
The candidates took questions from the moderators. They also took questions from parents and students. What were some of the sort of toughest questions? What were some of the key concerns that were raised?
They really were tough questions. And you had a coalition of public school advocates. Each of us, said, we'll invite our folks and see who shows up. So I, invited a lot of teachers and paraprofessionals and even administrators for public schools. But it was the parent groups that really took over that audience. 1,500 people sat there for 5 hours because they wanted to hear every single one of those candidates. The toughest questions came from the students that showed up. There was a little girl there who couldn't have been more than 12 years old, saying, I know what schools look like in some of our richest neighborhoods. I don't live in one of those neighborhoods. And I'm not looking for a way to escape my public school. I want to know why my public school doesn't look like those public schools. Let's start there.
Yeah.
So you got at something in the beginning. You said about how much the president matters in public school. Obviously, there's state, local, all this.
Right.
So outline for the audience, how much say does the president and the executive branch have in how public schools are doing?
It's incredible, and you have to kind of do a history lesson, incoming history lesson teacher thing going on here. But 1965, during the civil rights movement, we're talking President Johnson, creates this thing called the Department of Education. And people are like, why? Because that's a state function. We don't have a national public school system. We have a state public school system with school districts in a state. This was right after Brown versus the board. This was right after the mockery of with all deliberate speed, we'll integrate our schools. And it wasn't happening. And so as part of the civil rights movement, the Department of Education was supposed to protect the civil and human right of every student to have equal access and equal opportunity. And so Black students should have what white students have. Little girls should have what little boys have. And that expanded to, what about immigrant students? What about poor students? What about LGBTQ students? Where students have traditionally been discriminated against, the federal government was supposed to come in like with a program like special education. Should all students with disabilities have the same options, access, opportunity to succeed? Betsy DeVos has gutted that department, the Civil Rights Department of our current Department of Education. There's just crickets in the hall. It's empty. And what have we done? We've doubled down on what she did in Michigan. Let's take public schools and privatize them. 80% of the charter schools in Michigan are for-profit businesses, or they're scams that say they're nonprofit, but all of their suppliers are
making bank.
Right, and the charter board is making a profit off of that charter school.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that. One of the candidates who was there is Michael Bennett, who's long shot at this point, but he was a superintendent and he was a huge charter school proponent. And I've watched this, the way that the conversation has changed on the left around charter schools. He was really part of that movement when there was a thought that Democrats were going to writ large embrace the charter school movement. That has really shifted. Just speak to that and how he specifically was perceived there.
It is changing. And I will tell you, one of the biggest proponents of standardized, privatized, deprofessionalized was an amazing woman, Diane Ravitch. She looked at the evidence. She looked at the research. And what I love about Diane Ravitch, as strongly as she was for something like privatizing with charter schools, she said it actually makes it worse. And she did a very brave thing that you see rarely with politicians. And she said, I made a mistake, and I will put as much energy in telling people why that's a mistake as I did when I thought it was right. So think about it. You had a broad coalition of Republicans, Democrats, left and right, going, oh, this is like private school for poor kids. What could go wrong? Everything could go wrong. Even when you can find a well-run, good charter school, was that at the expense of the public school in the neighborhood that needed more and now is getting less?
So last question for you here, Lily, which is from the town hall, what was the unifying theme that you saw coming from the candidates talking about education? What
I loved was really what they had in common. They started from a point that said, we've listened, we've heard you parents, we've heard you teachers, we've listened to students. They want, number one, a choice of a great public school in every neighborhood. Why doesn't every public school look like our best public schools? And what we wanted coming out of that is that they would stop seeing that classroom teacher as the problem and start seeing as the source of the solution. We know what we need. Sit down and talk with us. Trust us. You trust us with your kids. Trust us with saying, this is what's holding us back. Because once we start really saying, here's what we need in a public school, things are going to get better. A lot of folks who, like Betsy DeVos, who have abandoned public schools, said, public schools are old-fashioned. We don't need them. We want these bright, shiny, privatized things. They don't want to see improvements in public schools. It works to their agenda to underfund them and make them joyless, horrible places. We aren't going to let that happen. We're going to stick around in those schools no matter what. We love those students. And to have 7 candidates undo the busiest schedules possible and say, I will come to a forum on an issue that no one thinks of as a presidential issue. And I will come not only to tell you what my plans are, we believe they left learning something. They let us teach something. In fact, not just the teachers, but the students. The questions about affordable college. I'm going to go bankrupt if I go to college. My student loans, loan forgiveness. So everything from preschool to graduate school. I believe, here's my prediction, that when we get back to the regular debates where everyone's interrupting each other and fighting on the stage for their airtime, that if someone doesn't ask them a question about education, they're asking them about health care, maybe someone will say, how about that school nurse? How about we make something in that public school happen for those kids that will improve their health?
Yeah, I think it's such an important issue. Thank you so much, Lily. Great to have you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Coming up, 3 new polls. One gives Biden a lead in the Super Tuesday states. Another lays out just how well he's been doing since the summer against other frontrunners.
And still another says Sanders is closing the gap on the former VP. Team Rising is here to give their thoughts on the current state of the race when Rising continues.